Aerospace, automotive, Formula One, the construction sector, manufacturing businesses employing 300,000 people who use steel, all being impacted by Labour's botched tariffs. Now, many of the specialist steels, and I think that the Minister may have heard this, as I have, from manufacturing businesses, are not, as it stands, even produced here in the UK. That's a real issue, for example, in categories 14 and 27, used in aircraft wings or in defence applications that we need to make ourselves safe. For defence companies with cost-plus contracts, the tariff on steel makes that are not made here will just get added to the bill for the Ministry of Defence. Will the Minister listen to Stephen Morley, President of the Confederation of British Metal Forming, who says the UK risks accelerating the decline of its manufacturing base rather than preserving it? Or Simon Boyd from Reed Steel, a British steelmaker, when he says these measures will kill off downstream customers of steelmakers in the UK. I'm sure that is not the Minister's intention, but with just 2 weeks to go, it is time, with respect, to stop listening and to start acting. So will the Minister answer 3 questions? Will he confirm today that the measures will not be applied retroactively throughout the whole of the life of existing agreed contracts? Second, will he exempt steel, especially in categories 14 and 27, that's simply not made here in the necessary volumes? And thirdly, will the government, after listening to industry, please delay these tariffs for at least 6 months so that they can get this right?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and very much in line with your guidance earlier about constructive debate. I'm sure we will have some constructive debate here, because the Shadow Minister has raised some very legitimate questions, and I'm very happy to provide the answers. I think we all recognise the importance of the steel industry and the downstream sector. There is definitely a point of agreement there. I think on this point of timing, which is a critical point, and on the face of it not an unreasonable request for a delay, I think the important thing to recognise is that our steel safeguard measure expires on the 30th of July. It is not possible for us to extend that. It's lasted for 8 years, and under WTO rules we couldn't extend that measure. So new measures are required. And of course the EU is introducing a new measure on the 1st of July. The US have introduced new measures. Canada have introduced measures. And so if we were to delay our measure, if we were not to introduce a measure, the UK would become the global dumping ground for subsidised steel. We are quite clear about that. That will be the end of our primary steel industry. So something needs to be done. And that's the point about timing. Now, in designing the measures, we've been very careful to ensure that the measures are targeted at those steels that are made or could be made in the UK. However, the categories are quite broad, and so we acknowledge that some steels that aren't made and couldn't be made in the UK could be swept up, and that's the point of the quotas. Since our draft measures were published, we've consulted extensively with industry. I do always listen to Steve Morley. I've known him for a very long time, and I do listen very carefully to what he says. But more than that, we've carried out extensive consultation. The Minister for Trade and I have met with the downstream group on 3 occasions. I've met with the Aerospace Growth Partnership, the Construction Leadership Council, and many other businesses. And we'll be publishing our final measures in line with our EU negotiations when they are completed in time for the 1st of July.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Engineering firms in Kingswinford and South Staffordshire are integral to automotive and aerospace supply chains. So how can it be right or in the national interest that the steel that they import and use, they pay a tariff of 50%, but the European producers making those parts with the same steel will pay low or no tariffs?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just been alerted to the fact that I said the current measures will expire on the 30th of July. It's actually the 30th of June, which I hopefully was correct in the context, but I'm happy to correct the measures. In relation to the specific point raised by the gentleman opposite, clearly these measures are designed to support primary steel production. That is the purpose of the measure. That's what they've been designed for. And it's really about getting the balance right between supporting that level of primary production in the UK and the issues with the downstream steel producers and ensuring that they can get the steels that they need within the UK, or perhaps more broadly within the EU, as we discuss our market arrangement measures with them.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the Minister says that the concerns about fabricated steel are being taken into account. Can he be a bit more specific about why it is that other countries have got protections for fabricated steel in their economies, but we don't yet have any in ours?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can give a specific example, if that would be helpful. So a number of members have mentioned the specific situation in Canada, for instance. And I have looked very carefully at the situation in Canada, and fundamentally there is a completely different tariff regime there, which would not necessarily be straightforward or legal to apply in the UK. However, I do continue to look at that. But what I would say, and I reiterate the point really, this measure is designed to support the steel industry. If there are other concerns that fall out with that, then they need to be raised and dealt with appropriately.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm greatly concerned by this. I spoke in the previous bill, on the steel bill, and I raised the concerns of some of my businesses. The Minister rightly said the measures expire on the 30th of June. There's less than 2 weeks to go. Huge amounts of uncertainty, and those costs are, because businesses are having to stock up on that steel, the costs are already going up. I mean, how did the government let this happen? Did the impact assessment not show that there was going to be a huge impact on that steel? And what's going to happen next, really?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So as I mentioned to my colleague, the Chair of the Select Committee, I'm very sympathetic to the issue around uncertainty. I think it's a difficult position for businesses to be in. But to be clear, the reason for the uncertainty is because the publication of the final measures is dependent on the negotiations around market access with the European Union, and it is, as to be expected, that those negotiations with the European Union will go very close to the deadline.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful. The real rise in the problem with steel is due to the energy price, the input price. Has he had any real challenging conversations with his Secretary of State colleague? And would he look at exemptions for the defence industry as well, as he knows the new Defence Secretary is now trying to balance a very difficult budget? I'm sure he'd be happy to do what he can to help.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank him for making that link to defence. I know he cares about it very deeply, and I think we all do, and that hasn't really come out up to now. On energy, we increased the supercharger rebate from 60% to 90%, as you'll know, and also the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme is coming into force from next year, but will be refunded for this year as well, and that will affect many of the downstream businesses. But really the crucial point about defence is, I believe we need to have the capability to make aerospace steels in the UK. I'm sure he does too, and our measures are designed to ensure that happens.
Neil Shaftesbury-Hurst.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is quite right to point to the uncertainty that businesses are facing, and my constituents and businesses in Solihull West and Shirley are repeating that message to me on regular occasions. The Minister has indicated that there may be a chance that some of the tariffs or the categorisations will be changed. Can he guarantee to come to the House and make a statement as soon as that is announced?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of course, as soon as the measures are finalised, then the Minister of Trade will want to report them to the House in the usual way.
I would suggest if you have a long question, just cross most of it out. Rebecca Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on Monday, my honourable friend, the member for West Worcestershire, asked the Defence Minister and the member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport about the impact of these new steel tariffs on the Defence Investment Plan. Now, his answer was not particularly clear, which surprised me, considering the strong representations he and I will both have had from the Plymouth Manufacturing Group. So I asked the Minister what conversations has he and his colleagues had with the Ministry of Defence about the impact of tariffs on the DIP, and will he agree to meet with me in the Plymouth Manufacturing Group?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Very happy to meet with her and representatives of businesses in her area. As Minister for Industry, it is my responsibility to ensure we have adequate productive capacity to defend the nation. In that respect, these steel measures will provide the steel that we need for defence.
Madam Deputy Speaker, but that's exactly what I did on behalf of my constituent Paul Kinchington. I wrote to the Secretary of State about his specialist steel that he uses, and I haven't had a reply. And why can't the Minister say today that he is going to exempt, until we are producing this steel ourselves, exempt from these tariffs all the steel that is not currently made in this country? It must be simple to do that.
You would imagine if it was simple, we would do it. Of course, it isn't that simple. And the reason that it isn't that simple is because, as I've described, the category groupings for steels are much broader than individual grades. So there are sort of 20-odd categories covering a whole range of grades. And that's why the quota size is particularly important. And so if there are issues with the quota, then we must deal with that. Now, I apologise on behalf of the Secretary of State. He's not had a reply to the letter. I can assure him I will get my officials to look into that immediately.
Deputy Speaker, I recently met with Littlewood Fencing in my constituency that makes specialist fencing for secure and sensitive locations, and they are facing crippling increases in costs. It might be noble to try and save jobs in the steel industry, but if jobs are lost in other parts of our economy, then you're not really achieving anything. And that is all about the rate of change that the government is seeking to introduce. It's clear from so many members in the House that that rate of change as currently proposed is not right. So the Minister rethink and, if necessary, pause and ensure that we don't lose jobs in constituencies like mine to save jobs in other parts of the country.
I think he's put his finger on exactly the issue we're all grappling with here, which is about how we manage this transition, essentially. I do recognise the importance of the business in his constituency producing secure fencing. There is a supply chain in the UK that could support that, leading from British Steel through the wire drawers. But he's right, it is really about the transition and managing that. But unfortunately, we have this hard stop at the end of this month, and we need to put something in place beyond that and manage that over the course of the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Prototype Productions in Long Crendon, Gibbs Gears in Stoke Mandeville, Aircraft Materials in Stoke-on-Church, all businesses in my constituency who categorically rely on grades of steel not made here in the United Kingdom. We've heard countless examples around the chamber of other businesses in other parts of the country. I've heard the Minister say, if there is a problem with quotas. I would put it to him that there quite clearly is a problem with quotas. And as we approach this cliff edge, I urge him, as so many others have, to stop, pause and ensure that we get this right, or jobs will be lost.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. So he talks of tool steels, and as I said, this is about steels that are made or could be made in the UK. Clearly, for the steel businesses to be profitable, we need to... Yes, well, could be made is actually quite important, because the speciality steels business was unable to compete compared with subsidised steel coming in from China. If the opposition say they want our steel strategy set by the Chinese government, then that's why our steel industry is in the position that it is in. I am sympathetic to the calls from UK businesses to manage the transition. I am trying to do that, but understandably, I do not believe that our steel strategy should be set by the Chinese government.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While I'm grateful for the Minister's engagement, I think both he and the House are learning the dangerous domino effect that begins when you start mucking about with tariffs. And I find it unbelievable that I'm placed in a position, as somebody who believes in free trade, that I would urge him to consider consequential tariffs on fabricated products that will compete with businesses in my constituency in a desperate attempt to hold on to at least domestic markets, given that international markets will evaporate. But my question is this. He said that he's going to review whatever emerges at the end of this process in 12 months. But the impact is going to be immediate. So could he please review it at 1 month?
He's quite right, there is a 12-month review. I'd like to thank him for his engagement, particularly with Stanley Stairlift, but also the further suggestions he's made about how we might manage the transition that he made to me privately, and I want to reassure him that I'm looking very carefully at those ideas that he raised. I think, just to be clear about this, I think everyone in this House believes in free and fair trade. We'd all wish we lived in a world where there weren't tariffs. UK Steel has, of course, welcomed these measures, but they've said that they would prefer there weren't tariffs as well. Unfortunately, it's the product of the world that we are in. And so, I don't think it is mucking about with tariffs. I think it's essentially responding to the global trading situation and trying to ensure that we have a strategy that means that we have a viable UK industry.
Sir John Whittingdale, and after hearing the answer, may wish to get into the private member's bill queue. Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister state what assessment he has made of the grades of steel that are simply not produced in this country? And what is his message to companies like C&M Precision Limited in my constituency, and all the ones that have been mentioned this afternoon, who face an immediate increase in their costs because they have absolutely no alternative except to import their steel?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So yes, the government's done a very detailed assessment of the steels that aren't made and couldn't be made in the UK. Unfortunately, because of the way the categorisations are set, some of those steel grades are then swept up in a tariff measure along with other steels that are made in the UK. And the quotas are particularly designed to deal with that. So really it's about getting that quota level right, and that's very much part of the discussions that we've been having today. But I do understand this point.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've talked about businesses being affected, large and small.
But my constituent Joe, who's a sales director in an SME that is likely to be affected, is deeply concerned about his livelihood. So I've got a very simple question for the Minister. If he's taken on board industry feedback, will he publish detailed information on safeguard quota allocations and anticipated utilisation rates before these measures come into place on the 1st of July?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think he's absolutely right to bring this conversation back to the people who are involved in the industry. We've had lots of conversation about steel and quotas and so on, but this is very much about people and also steel communities and communities such as in the Black Country where there are lots of downstream users. Of course, the government will publish the details as soon as they are available, but as I said, this is very much dependent on our concurrent negotiations with the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has repeatedly referred to steel that could be made in the UK, but these tariffs come in 2 weeks, so that is no use to the manufacturers I've spoken to in North West Norfolk, where grade, specification and volumes are simply not available. So why is the government failing to recognise this and guarantee that tariffs will not apply where people cannot get that steel in the UK?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Maybe I could just address this point about could be made, which I think is at the nub of what he's saying. So this issue here is where we have latent capacity in the UK. So some of that could be made as an existing steel plant that could stretch its product range, but that's not the primary concern for me. It's about latent capacity, where we have steel capabilities in the UK that are not operating due to unfair competition from overseas. So fundamentally, we have to make a decision to correct a market failure to ensure that those businesses are investable for the private sector, profitable, can operate and can deliver those products into the market.
Final question, Jim